Transportation of people and goods is the single largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, accounting for 30% of total emissions. Over the last 30 years, the passenger vehicle category has gotten incrementally more energy efficient and has begun reducing its emissions profile. But heavy transportation, or what's called Class 8, hasn't nearly kept up. It's a problem of basic physics. A loaded semi, freight, or garbage truck weighs as much as 33 cars. And unlike most of those cars, it drives up to 500 miles a day. So no matter where it comes from, these trucks require a lot more energy. And that energy has to be available at a fueling station and stored on the truck to be used throughout its daily duty cycle. It's a tough nut to crack, which is why 97% of Class 8 trucks are still burning diesel. As energy sources go, it's relatively cheap and widely available. The problem is, apart from coal, it's one of the least clean, carbon-intense sources of energy out there. As everyone watching knows, we've only got about 10 years to dramatically cut back our carbon emissions to avoid the worst outcomes of climate change. And we're simply not going to get there without cleaning up heavy transportation. We have to find ways to get off diesel, and we have to act now. And that means that companies that rely on Class 8 fleets have a couple of key questions to ask. What are the alternatives to diesel? Which ones are actually viable? And what actions can I take today? For the last 10 years, TruStar Energy has been laser focused on these exact questions to develop a viable, cost-effective alternative to diesel fuel. But before we get to that, it's important to first understand the bigger picture of where Class 8 emissions come from, how they're measured, and how the alternatives stack up. Broadly speaking, the full emissions profile of any Class 8 fleet is determined by two factors: direct emissions and fuel source emissions. Direct emissions are what comes directly out of the tailpipe as a byproduct of internal combustion or use of whatever fuel is on board. The other key factor is where the fuel comes from that powers your trucks. This fuel either comes from the ground like fossil fuels or from renewable sources such as solar, wind, or biogas. We could dive deeper into all these metrics, but here's the bottom line. Reducing emissions is not just about what happens at the vehicle. You have to also account for the fuel source that powers it. So what's the solution? Well, ideally, we'd find a way to get both vehicle emissions and the carbon intensity of the fuel source down to zero. In theory, this could be achieved with a battery-powered Class 8 vehicle charged entirely by carbon-free wind, solar, biogas, or other renewable electricity source. At TruStar Energy, we call this the holy grail of carbon-free heavy transport. Based on everything we know today, it's the only complete solution, and it's one that we absolutely must pursue. The problem for all the companies with Class 8 trucks on the road today is we're just not there yet. There's electric Class 8 prototypes in design, but we're still waiting for a production model. And we're years away from building the charging infrastructure needed to prove them cost and operationally viable at scale. The other issue, of course, is the fuel source. Until we have enough clean electricity to support Class 8 fleets at scale, we'll still be burning fossil fuels to power them. And right now, only about 17% of our country's electric grid is powered by renewable sources. So the big question is, until that holy grail is at least within reach, what actions can Class 8 fleet operators take? And that brings us back to TruStar Energy. For 10 years, we've focused exclusively on producing a renewable, cost-effective, low-carbon alternative to diesel for all those big trucks on the road. It's called biogas or renewable natural gas, RNG for short. And it's already being used in over 60,000 Class 8 trucks today. RNG is identical to the natural gas Americans use to cook with, heat our homes, and fuel natural gas engines with one huge difference. It's not a fossil fuel, and it's not pumped from the ground. Instead, RNG is a byproduct of landfills and animal waste that we capture before it leaks into the atmosphere or is required to be burned off. From a carbon standpoint, converting harmful waste emissions into a usable fuel is a win-win, which is why states like California and Oregon offer significant incentives to put it in use in Class 8 fleets. So how does it stack up? To measure the full carbon cost of any given fuel from the source to the pipeline to the tailpipe, the EPA and other regulatory agencies use a science-based standardized carbon intensity score. As you can see, diesel's the most carbon intense, followed by fossil compressed natural gas, electricity from the grid, and finally, RNG has the lowest carbon intensity score, sometimes reaching -300. That means replacing a Class 8 diesel truck with RNG would reduce your carbon intensity score by at least 60% and up to 300%. That's pretty powerful. And just for comparison, based on the electric grid we have today, it would take 2 to 3 electric Class 8s to achieve the same net emissions reductions as one RNG truck. And here's one more big factor we believe makes RNG a viable alternative, and that's cost. Carbon incentives in states like California and Washington can reduce effective fuel costs in some cases to as low as 75 cents per gallon. Now, those are some powerful numbers for sure, but to be clear, RNG is not without limitations, and it will never completely replace diesel. There's simply not enough supply. But the truth is, there is no one silver bullet for a challenge of this scale. In order to fully decarbonize heavy transportation, companies will need to build a portfolio of diesel alternatives and adopt new technologies over time. But as a proven, viable solution already in use today, we believe that for the right companies, RNG can make an immediate impact and help move that needle. Let's get moving.
Okay, as you can see, Adam, Mike, and Kristen have now joined us for the live discussion and Q&A. So again, do keep submitting the questions as you did in the first session, and we'll get through as many of them as we can over the next roughly 35 minutes or 36 minutes. So, and firstly, before I dive into discussion, I just want to bring attention, later in this month, we'll be hosting a workshop discussion in partnership with TruStar Energy, and a link to this workshop with more information to that and the registration options is going to be shared now in the Q&A box just to the right. So one of my colleagues will be sharing that shortly, so do check that out and have a look there. But for now, we've got a great discussion lined up. On the back of that presentation, I'm sure there's a number of questions you guys have. I've got a number of questions to dive into, but before we jump into those, I would like to ask you firstly, Adam, to introduce yourself and provide a bit more information about TruStar, and then I'll come to yourself, Christine and Mike, just give some few words about yourselves and your work, and then we can dive straight in. So firstly, to you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank everybody for joining us for this session. We're very pleased to be speaking to you on this topic today. We think it's very worthwhile, and we think we've got great panelists here to do it. Diving into how fleets can reduce carbon emissions and their carbon footprint, how they're accounting for those emissions, and what technologies are available, and take a deeper dive into a successful technology that's being deployed today, renewable natural gas. A little bit more on TruStar Energy. We're one of the largest producers of renewable natural gas. We have a growing portfolio of projects that are taking harmful emissions from landfills and dairy digesters and cleaning it and recycling it and using it as a transportation fuel. TruStar Energy then has a dedicated group that are building natural gas fueling fueling stations for our customers. We service and maintain them. We'll have 4,000 Class 8 vehicles fueling at TruStar's operated stations in 2020, utilizing about 80 million gallons of transportation fuel. As Liam had noted, we invite you to come on October 15th, when we'll be taking a deeper dive into the economics, the incentives, and the practical application of renewable natural gas deployment in your Class 8 fleet. So we welcome you to come back and learn more about how it can work for your fleet.
Brilliant, and I can confirm the link is now in the box just to the right of the stream. So it's there to access. So Christine, thank you for joining us, and yeah, a few words about yourself and the work you do at Deloitte.
Great, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon to those of you on the line. Really thrilled to be here. I lead Deloitte's sustainability and ESG services across the Americas region, and we work with clients across the whole spectrum of what's become known as the ESG landscape, and how companies are really looking at ESG as more of a value driver and a lens to manage risk and optimize value more effectively. In my role and as a part of our role from a professional services standpoint, I contribute to a number of standard setting initiatives, the initiatives that are helping to shape the market infrastructure to make disclosure, transparency, communication, and consumption of this performance information easier, more efficient, and to deliver value and really unlock capital. And so I participate in a number of those initiatives. I also chair the AICPA's Sustainability Assurance Task Force, with the emphasis on quality, consistency, comparability of information, again, to drive more efficiency and minimize the noise and fragmentation in the system. So I've had the opportunity to work with Adam and the team at TruStar, and really pleased to be here today.
Brilliant, thank you. And lastly, Mike, a few words, and then we can dive straight into the questions.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. Mike Casteel. I was with UPS for about 40 years. I retired last year. I'm currently working with TruStar to promote or at least encourage the adoption of natural gas in the transportation industry, and renewable natural gas specifically. For the last part of my career at UPS, the last 10 years or so, I was a director of fleet procurement for UPS. So I played a leading role in developing the financial strategies around developing and expanding our natural gas fleet. As of today, as a result of that, we've got over 50 natural gas stations and several thousand natural gas trucks that we're running in the U.S. So I'm looking forward to the session. Let's get started.
Brilliant. And then, let's get started. I'll dive straight in. Okay. So this topic, I know why this topic is important. I've done some reading around it, but I'd like one of you to share why you feel this topic is so important. We know the macro forces are at play in terms of the increasing focus on carbon, mainstreaming of ESG. So, Kristen, you have an excellent overview of this, I suppose, at Deloitte, and can bring in, I suppose, a different perspective to maybe Adam and Mike. So maybe I want to come to you first. Why is it so important to you, and your thoughts on that, and then we can maybe go to Adam and Mike afterwards.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I know we have a very sophisticated audience here. And so it's certainly, I think, putting into context from our purview and the role that we play in the market, clearly the conversation around climate has only elevated. And you could argue that even the COVID effect has further amplified attention to ESG more broadly, but even put climate in a real spotlight in terms of how the market is evolving. I think we're seeing just an increasing sophistication of market participants who are looking to drive accountability in terms of corporate performance, the recognition that business has a new role in society. There's a new social contract that organizations need to comply with, and in particular, this rapid move towards decarbonization, with the emphasis on the significant impacts of climate change and the urgency, that I think it's really compelling organizations to really look across their entire business model, their strategy, and understand how they can really drive meaningful change and communicate it in a way that can be consumed and can be trusted in the market. And again, the decisions that are being made on companies, the intensity, the way they gather information around companies is really just putting value at risk for organizations who aren't really taking an intentional approach. And so I think that's why this conversation is even more important in the context of the climate conversation.
And I just want to dive in a little bit on that. You mentioned there, that transparency, the trust in what's being disclosed, and communicating meaningful change. What trend are you seeing? Trends that are developing, coming out over the past couple of years? Because there is increased attention. The investor, from our perspective, over the past couple of years, we've seen a vast range of investors now plugging into our activities, our magazine, our events, and asking for more information. And obviously, that's it's having an effect on the whole, as you say, the disclosure piece, and communicating accurate data that points to real change. So, being at Deloitte, you've got a great oversight of some of the trends or some of the changes that have been happening over the past 12 to 24 months. So it'd be great to pick apart if there's anything there that you can share, and then take it on a little bit further.
Sure. And I'm sure all of you on the line are recognizing basically daily we're seeing new headlines around the continued pace of change and really move towards rationalization, convergence of standards in this space, all recognizing this growing appetite, this insatiable appetite by market participants, investors in particular, but other stakeholders, to really gain a deeper understanding into how companies are managing through climate risk in particular. And so I think we've seen, again, this pace and signals from even policy, regulators, international standard setters to really move towards a convergence to drive more consistency and transparency. I think when we unpack a little bit, and for purposes of this conversation, getting at the heart of measuring your carbon footprint and how does that serve as a catalyst for change and strategies and behavior. And I think as we dig into this opportunity in particular, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about it, but even just in the sort of landscape of standards with the GHG protocol that I know everyone on the line is very familiar with, that has been the authoritative source for the measurement and disclosure of carbon impact and emissions. I think we've seen that with a number of innovations and new strategies and opportunities in the market to look at that entire profile of an organization, that really digging in, and the WRI is undertaking an update to the standard to really unpack the three scopes that we're all well aware of, and this higher degree of emphasis on a lens into the entire value chain and a focus on scope 3 emissions, and where I think there's a bit of blurring in terms of the way organizations today are communicating emissions in some of these newer areas in terms of biogenic emissions, looking at scope 3 more intentionally, and how do you add that level of transparency and information to provide the market an understanding in terms of how your strategies are making an impact on your overall emissions profile, but how that's increasingly being disclosed using the recognized standards, and understanding that there are updates that need to be made, which are underway today. So I think this putting a spotlight on this opportunity with renewable natural gas is a great prompt to, and a reinforcement of the importance of the attention to these standards updates. And
sorry, I've just you actually sparked something in my head. You talked about the change and the standards at work. Am I right in thinking last week at the Climate Week or the UN General Assembly, there was a lot of great, exciting announcements come out of both of the virtual events that were part of that week. And one I think I picked up was it was the first time that all four big accounting organizations came together, and they were talking about trying to bring a standardized approach to this, the data around environmental. And so am I right in thinking was that a development, or do correct me if I'm wrong?
No, absolutely. That was a big development. And to be clear, to sort of put the WEF-IBC, the World Economic Forum International Business Council report into context, so we all know there are standards and frameworks that are generally accepted that are used in different ways and applied at different levels of in accordance, if you will. And with this momentum and this investor appetite to truly better understand the financial implications of ESG performance, there's been this appetite and this move towards a rationalization of these standard setters and an emphasis on the importance of providing disclosure in more public financial filings. So the World Economic Forum International Business Council report was really the opportunity for business to put a stake in the ground, the voice of business. There's standard setters, there are policymakers, there are investors, but the voice of business to say, we've got to take some meaningful steps to reduce the fatigue. There's so much reporting and a continued, the requests are never ending for companies. And so where is there sort of a step in the direction of this idea of a common set of disclosures, recognizing that materiality certainly suggests that different areas of focus and performance disclosure is warranted for different industries. But the World Economic Forum report, the IBC report, established 21 metrics, and it was facilitated by the Big Four. It's not a new standard. That's one of, I think, the points I like to demystify right away. This is not the Big Four setting a new standard. The last thing we need is a new standard. We need movement towards and progress towards rationalization of the existing standards. Yes. And that's the purpose. And it's all leading towards, as some of you may have seen, just yesterday, the IFRS Foundation, so that the financial reporting standard setting body, the authoritative financial reporting standard setting body, issued a consultation yesterday to establish an equivalent authoritative non-financial standard setting body to take a very well-governed due process approach to rationalizing the standards in this space. So lots happening. I think that's at a very high level, enterprise level. But as we get into this conversation, there's so much really in unpacking the practices that are employed today using the recognized standards around GHG emissions, in particular the GHG protocol. And even at that level, where improvements are needed to enhance the transparency, the comparability, and the importance of this information.
Yeah,
Thank
Liam, if you don't mind if I just jump in
Please,
here.
please do.
Yeah, the way we've been thinking about it as well is more disclosure is coming, more consistent disclosure is coming, and when you look at your transportation emissions and your carbon footprint from your transportation emissions, it's really important to look at the full life cycle of it. You will need to account for where the fuel source comes from, and that's really one of the things that we think enterprises need to understand and fleets need to understand, that there will be this disclosure. It's important not only to improve your ESG scores, and we also think it's a mitigant to future liabilities, whether it be a carbon tax or something else. You will need to see where all these carbon emissions come from and have effective strategies to bring them down in a practical manner.
Yeah, and I was literally about to come to you with a question, Adam, because I could have gone down this path, and I wanted to bring it back to some of the questions I got on the back of the presentation. And one thing you talked to was the total emissions calculator and electric vehicles, and that's part of the present. And I just wanted to bring in, can you explain that again, because I digested, but it was very interesting to me. Net zero emission vehicles are, how that calculated out.
I'm glad you asked that, Liam. It is a little bit of a nuanced conversation, and I think it's really important to hit upon that topic. When you create your emissions from your transportation, it's coming from two sources. It's coming from what's at the vehicle itself, and then what's powering that vehicle. And there's been a large push towards electrification or hydrogen powertrain vehicles, which we think are a terrific solution if and when that technology develops. But those technologies are also developed on a renewable electricity grid. In other words, if you went to full electrification today, the electricity that you would be using, is from the electric grid, unless you have a dedicated renewable source on site, which brings a lot of logistical challenges to it. You have to consider the fact that the electricity grid is not yet ready to deliver zero emission electric transportation fuel, right? So that when you do use that electrification, unfortunately, currently, you would still be creating those scope 2 emissions from the electricity that you're using from the grid. And
I'm just going to come in here. We just had a question come through, and I suppose it's pertaining to that graph. RNG, renewable natural gas, scores a negative carbon intensity score. How is that so? I'm sure there's a couple of people have voted it up, so I'm sure if you can provide a bit of clarity there, would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, carbon intensity scores, for those that don't know, are science-based targets that are used by regulatory bodies to measure the carbon intensity of fuels. And it's used to generate their carbon credits. Specifically out in California, CARB uses that when they're managing their LCFS program. So your carbon intensity score measures the full life cycle of your fuel for how much carbon you're either emitting into the atmosphere or potentially saving. And how we get to a negative carbon intensity score, which again, these aren't TruStar scores, they're science-based, used by governmental regulatory bodies. It's based on how much carbon we are avoiding or capturing and not letting it emit into the atmosphere. So if you would let specifically the really negative or carbon intensity scores typically come from animal waste digestion, where if a cow or a pig has waste that sits on the ground, their manure, what we're doing is we're capturing all that methane that would have leaked up into the atmosphere. So we are avoiding a lot of carbon that would have otherwise escaped. So that's how it gets to a negative number, because there is so much methane that comes out of those farming operations that you're able to get to a dramatically negative CI score.
Thank you. And Mike, I know you sat patiently, you kept your intro short, and we've dived into a number of questions. So I want to bring you in now, and you talked, I think you said you worked at UPS for a number of decades before this transition. So I know you would have looked at a number of alternative kind of fuels, diesel, new technologies, new fuels. So where do you see the current state of the market, and what? I suppose, what's the oversight? What's your views on the current state of the market and the different types of fuels that are available?
Well, I should say, as I mentioned before, my role was primarily financial, but I worked closely with our sustainability group, and we came to realize at some point that it would be possible for us to greatly expand our use of natural gas, and through that, having that network transition into natural gas, and it would be not only environmentally sustainable but economically sustainable. So, I mean, that's what ultimately businesses, I think, are looking for. And since my role was financial, I was looking for a way to address sustainability goals and do it in a financially feasible way. And we've been able to do that. So the state of the industry today is the supply of renewable natural gas is limited, but it's growing due to interest. And the natural gas trucks that are being put on the street today are performing just superbly. And so it has become for us a sort of a seamless transition in the appropriate spot. It really works. So in the Class 8 industry, that's kind of the nature of that's the alternative fuel that is available. There are biodiesels out there and renewable diesels out there, all in limited quantities. But we believe that renewable natural gas is the key to us achieving some sustainability goals that we set a number of years ago.
Okay, and on maybe a question to come back to you on. Someone's submitted a question between RNG, CNG, and propane. Which of these three are the easiest and cheapest to transition to? And maybe is there a step process behind them? Is one a kind of a feeder into another?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Renewable natural gas is the same exact chemical properties as natural gas, except for where it came from, where it wasn't mined, it wasn't pumped from the ground, it was capturing harmful methane emissions. They get cleaned up, put into the natural gas pipeline, and then used as if you were using natural gas and propane. So from a technology standpoint, there is a significant amount of green technology on the front end to clean it up and process it. And then once you're using it, it runs similar to existing natural gas. So I would say it's a seamless deployment as if you were running on natural gas. We just think it's a better fuel source to use, and you should be choosing renewable natural gas when you make that transition. The reason why I thought Mike and love having Mike on this panel is they've done this, and they've done it in a practical way where companies are also saving money. And I know that there is a promise for electric or hydrogen out there in the future. Not only do you have to solve a lot of the challenges that are on the truck, which we are rooting for and hope it happens, and we'll take that renewable natural gas and we'll pivot it once those technologies are available. But it's not only on the truck that you have to worry about when that truck technology is ready to do the duty cycle and carry enough electricity. There are numerous challenges on the charging infrastructure as well on when that will be developed and when that will get there. So we think we've got something that works today, and it doesn't preclude somebody, if and when that technology is ever ready, to seamlessly transition into it. So I think your question was specifically about natural gas versus renewable natural gas and propane. Natural gas and renewable natural gas are essentially the same from a deployment standpoint. It's just where you're getting your feedstock from.
And you mentioned briefly there actually in your presentation, and you just mentioned there that the electrification, hydrogen powered Class 8 trucks. I think you mentioned it as the holy grail, the end in sight, so to say. What's your view? Is it, you mentioned there's a lot of, I suppose, hurdles to get over. Is that a decade-long process? Do you think, your personal view? Maybe Kristen or Mike, if you have anything to add to that, because
I'll start on that. Unfortunately, we don't know because there are so many issues that go along with it, both on the truck performance side, on the fueling station side, on what's the fueling strategy going to be able to put it all on the vehicle, and that other big issue or question that needs to be addressed is, how do we get to the renewable electricity to power it, to make it really a zero emission vehicle? And I don't have the exact time frame for when all that's going to happen. I do know it's many years out, and we can't wait that long. So we may as well find an economical and practical solution today and still get all those emission reductions by using renewable natural gas. So, we think we've got a solution that works now until that holy grail ever develops, or when it could develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kristen, Mike, do you have any views on this, or is this the ideal, I suppose, transition fuel at present until the technology and the infrastructure and things come through?
Absolutely agree with Adam's comments, and just to emphasize, we need emission reductions today, and so this is renewable natural gas is a great pathway to make meaningful progress while the infrastructure, the technology on the electrification and hydrogen side continue to develop. For sure.
Thank you. Adam, you talked to some numbers. You talked to numbers in the presentation, but didn't dive into them. So, what are the real economics behind this and the performance of natural gas trucks running on RNG?
So I'm going to actually let Mike talk to that, because Mike, had, probably as good an insight as anybody, in the sector in terms of the performance and the economics for all these trucks, and why UPS moved so aggressively in one direction. I will say, though, we will be taking a very deep dive into that on October 15th. So I encourage you to invite your CFOs and your fleet operators, where we can run through, how much a renewable natural gas truck costs, where the state incentives are, how you can access those incentives, and what your real payback periods can be. We're seeing paybacks if you deploy these vehicles and run on renewable natural gas in California in as little as 12 to 14 months. On your incremental truck investments outside of California, it could be 3 to 4 years. It's all dependent on how much fuel your trucks use, because it's all underpinned by significant savings to diesel on a per gallon basis. So there's a truck investment on the upfront, and then how many gallons a year you use is how quick your payback is, and how much annual operating cost savings you can get.
Okay, Adam. So Mike, he's batted it over to you. So just to remind, you've gone through this. You've looked at the numbers. So what are the economics and numbers behind this, and having natural gas trucks run on RNG? And then maybe, if you don't mind, if I add a second one into that, those that are listening in, and we are seeing a number of questions and activity on this session. So there's a lot of interest here. So those that are looking to take action now, how difficult is it to deploy? Say from them watching and the implementation to change a fleet. I know it's going to be a long process, but if you can talk to that, the economics and I suppose how to implement and what that could look like, that would be great to share to those watching.
Sure. The economics are obviously dependent on the situation that we're looking at. It's I can only say that the fuel savings will generate enough positive cash flow to recover your incremental investment. The trucks cost more, and there's a reason for that. I mean, the systems that are on these trucks are very robust. We bought trucks that gave us 600 plus miles range, so it's a seamless operation for us to use in the same way we would use the diesel truck. When can you recover that investment? It really all has to do with the fuel that you use. We put as much fuel through these trucks as we can. We put them on the highest mile routes that we had available to us, and we knew going in how we were going to deploy them. So we went into a location knowing we've got 50 routes or this many routes that run this many miles, and we have a lot of control over what trucks we put on what route. So it was a relatively simple process for us to develop a business case in certain cities where we knew we had that kind of deployment available to us. And the return on investment was acceptable to us. Today, I mean, we're saving a lot of money on fuel. So as far as the difficulty of transitioning, it's another local question, and a lot of it depends on how you're going to fuel. If there are fuel stations that are near you and you can utilize that are existing today, then really it only takes a few months to buy trucks and to train mechanics and drivers, which is also a fairly simple process. Once they have a minimal training, they operate just like any other truck. If you're going to have to build a fuel station, then it can take longer. It can take a year. It can take 18 months to build a station and then deploy the fleet. So it's, anywhere from say 6 to 18 months is a pretty good round number to think about, what it's going to take when you make a decision to move forward.
And in terms of the maintenance, I'm new to this. I've been reading around it before coming, but is there any extra cost, maintenance, and considerations there, or even fueling? You mentioned fuel stations there. Are there hidden things that may not be so obvious to people that are coming into this new?
Well, nothing would be hidden. I mean,
sorry, hidden's probably the wrong phrase, but some things
well, I mean,
unforeseen.
It's the education is out there. It's the maintenance cost about the same as a diesel. We didn't see a measurable difference over time with the cost of maintenance. There are some differences in the maintenance. Your shops have to have methane detectors. There are certain rules that you have to follow, but it's not a complicated process. It's a little different. And then the fueling, we build the stations, and most of the commercial stations that are out there, you can fuel in close to the same amount of time it takes to fuel a diesel truck at a commercial fast fuel station. So but for us, for UPS, it became a completely routine. In the beginning, there is some training and some learning that has to be done, but there's a lot of literature out there, and the component manufacturers provide that. So it's a straightforward process.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that. It's a proven technology. It's a known quantity. There were certain fleets that moved into this technology, beginning with fossil natural gas before the renewable natural gas industry began to grow and produce more and more. So people have been running the natural gas trucks for a period of time. There's 60,000 on the road, burning 600-700 million gallons a year. So it is well defined in terms of what the maintenance costs are, what the performance specs are, and in terms of Mike's timing to build a station, I'm going to challenge him. Because at TruStar, by the way, we've built about 300 of these natural gas fueling stations around the country. Our typical construction time is about 6 to 8 months after we greenlight when a station is going to be. Things that could, make that deployment a little longer. Perhaps there is permitting in California may take a little bit longer than other places in the country. And perhaps it takes a little bit of time to work with the utility to make sure that you've got service to the station. But as Mike was saying, maybe it takes 6 months to get your trucks delivered. And if we find a location where it can work, we can have that station, operationally, 6 to 8 months is not out of the question for locations.
Yeah, those longer time frames that we ran into, it was mostly permitting or utility work, but those are the ones that tend to stick in my mind, Adam. Those are the ones that I have to pay more attention to.
I understand that.
I'm just reading through this. Well, someone's firstly said thank you, great information. And they've asked, are there similar solutions available for light duty fleets? And also maybe a question for you, Kristen, to come in on. And do you see trends emerging in the light duty sector? So I don't know if Adam or Mike, you want to address the first one about are there similar solutions available?
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in first here. And this is what we also tried to highlight in our video. There is no one silver bullet for all of transportation. And I would actually encourage people to go out. Bill Gates wrote a blog on August 24th in Gates Notes. And maybe I'll drop that into our virtual booth if that doesn't violate any copyright laws, because I think everybody should read it. It's really terrific. It talks about how, different applications require different solutions. So, we happen to think that this is the best, most practical, most economical and available now for the heavy duty fleets, passenger vehicles, lighter duty stuff where you don't need to have to store as much energy on board. The charging infrastructure won't be as difficult to accomplish. We think that's a terrific solution, for passenger vehicles and lighter duty vehicles. We're really focused on what has been a more difficult challenge in the heavy duty fleets.
Yeah, and before I left UPS, we committed to putting 6,000 medium duty natural gas trucks in our fleet, and we'll use the same stations that we use for the Class 8 fleet. So yeah, those natural gas and renewable natural gas are available for lighter duty, and for us, medium duty. there are a lot more options in those, in those truck sizes than there are on the Class 8 side.
Okay. And there's a question come through, and it's similar to one I had, and it's, you mentioned, how much renewable natural gas is available? How scalable is this approach? I don't know if this could be a question to all three, if you have insights or ideas, but what percentage of heavy transportation could be put on renewable natural gas?
Yeah. So this is Adam here. There's plenty available now. And we continue to grow our portfolio. We specifically at TruStar are producing about 25 million gallons today, and we're in construction on additional projects that'll grow our supply to about 125, 130 million gallons in the next couple of years. There isn't enough renewable natural gas for the entire transportation sector. We think that maybe there's enough for 8 to 10%. But we're a far ways away from that. So there's plenty now, and I think we'll actually continue to develop new technologies to scale down to smaller size landfills and smaller size dairies. So where we see it today and we're not even scratching the surface of using that 8 to 10% today. So there's plenty for now, and we think that the industry will continue to develop new ways to tap into smaller resources and find new sources of biomethane that can be used commercially.
Christine or Mike, do you have anything there? Or if not, I've got one roundup question. We've got a few minutes left.
Adam's the expert on renewable natural gas supply. We're heavy users, millions of gallons, gallon equivalents of renewable natural gas, and we're putting more on as we speak.
Brilliant. Okay. We've got a couple of minutes left, so just I suppose 60-second thoughts on 10 years time. Heavy what is it? Class 8 trucks, heavy duty trucks. Where do you see it? To meet obviously the goals. This is an area that has to be addressed. So, what's your thought? And that'd be to all three of you. I'd like to get your thoughts on that in the final couple of minutes.
I'll be brief. I see electrification continuing to evolve, but we don't. I didn't look at it as a mutually exclusive option. The natural gas trucks we're buying are long range vehicles, and electrification in the beginning, at least, is going to be primarily used on shorter routes, and it's going to depend on some heavy grid improvements in a lot of areas to generate, because they use an incredible amount of energy. So. And Adam's already touched on the possibility, the hydrogen. People are looking at hydrogen. So all of those things they're a ways off from long or I would say large scale deployment. Whereas today, what we're doing is available and it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add that I think it's building on both Mike and Adam's points in terms of, today, right now, we need all hands on deck to really be able to chart out the progress that's possible in 10 years. And I think just to bring in the sort of the move towards enhanced disclosure and how more meaningful and accurate and reliable disclosure is just really going to unlock the capital and the investment that's going to be needed to continue to enhance the infrastructure and the technology enhancements to really scale some of these new alternative avenues at scale.
Thank you, Kristen. And Adam, final words, final thoughts?
No, just again, appreciate everybody logging in here. We think it's a very exciting time. We're thrilled that it's really become front and center, right? We've been thinking about this problem, this issue for a long time. And quite frankly, it just feels like over the last 12 or 18 months, there's been an invigorated commitment to recording carbon emissions, to finding practical solutions to reducing those carbon emissions. And quite frankly, we're thrilled that we have something that can work for both sides of the house, where we can meet financial objectives of corporations and sustainability objectives through a technology that's available today. So we're excited. We're excited to work with fleets out there that are thinking about this, and welcome you all to join again on the 15th.
Thank you. And yes, I think It's an interesting point. I think a couple of made throughout this discussion. It's going to take a mixture of a number of new technologies, a number of new solutions to realize the change and the goals that we have ahead of us. And I think this plays an important part in that. So it's great to be able to share that with you through the presentation and this discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. So thank you to yourself, Mike, to yourself, Kristen, and to yourself, Adam, for joining us and sharing the great work. It's been my pleasure to host this Q&A.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care, guys. And again, those of you who want to dive deeper into these discussions, TruStar Energy have a booth in our exhibition area. You can submit information there to get a follow-up discussion, or if not, again, the link's just on the right-hand side where you can access more information on the workshop that's taking place on October the 15th. Okay, let's move on. Next up, we have a 15-minute discussion looking at how ADM is future-fitting its supply chain by putting purpose at the heart. We have Alison Taylor, CSO of ADM, speaking with our very own Terry Sullivan, Editor-in-Chief, Sustainable Business at Reuters Events. Here's a 15-minute discussion.